Okay, my friends, I have about 7 big stories for you today. I apologize in advance because of the sound. I'm in a different room, and because of that, it's somewhat cavernous, and as a consequence, we're hearing a little bit of an echo, and I apologize. Okay, first big story. The U.S. military has transported about 90 Patriot air defense interceptor missiles from a stockpile in Israel to Poland, from where they will be delivered to Ukraine, according to Axios. Now, remember the other day, we were looking at like, why is this plane going from Israel from the west down to Israel to Poland? And was that Western weapons that are Russian weapons? That's not what was going on. But this is good news. Well, kind of good news. The supply of Patriot missiles from Israel to Ukraine became possible after the Israeli Air Force officially decommissioned one of its systems in April of 2024, following more than 30 years of service. Axios sources say that after this, the Ukrainian side proposed this plan to the U.S. and Israel. Israel would return the Patriot missiles to the U.S., which would be refurbish them and then send them to Ukraine. In September of 2024, after months of delay due to concerns about Russia's reaction. That's what delayed this. Like, we're always worried about crazy Uncle Frank over here, and like, he's the crazy guy, but everybody's tap dancing around him. Okay, so due to months of delays, due to concerns about Russia's reaction, Israel's prime minister finally agreed to the plan. According to Axios, due to this delay, Zelensky allegedly refused to take calls from Netanyahu, who was seeking approval for the annual Hasidic pilgrimage to Uman. Okay, well, I mean, I don't blame him. Like, you're worried about Russia. Really? Like, okay, so that's big story number one. Big story number two. The European Union will not impose a complete ban on the purchase of liquefied natural gas, LNG, as part of the 16th sanctions package. Two EU diplomats have told Politico. Now, here's what happened. Instead of a full ban, the new restrictions only block Russian LNG shipments to terminals that are not connected to EU gas systems. So it doesn't really do anything. That means that most LNG imports remain unaffected. But on paper, darn it, they're doing something about it. The package also includes sanctions on 74 ships from Russia's shadow fleet, restrictions on aluminum exports from Russia. Those are both good. A ban on gaming equipment, including Microsoft Xbox, because the EU suspects that Russia may be using that to control drones. I've seen a story about that. They're not making that up. Like, they are using Xboxes to control drones. It's fascinating. Jay and Keeve commented on this about how they won't sanction the Russian liquefied natural gas. Europeans' ability to bring themselves to war by inaction is unmatched. I mean, that is what it is. We're making a statement, even if it has no real effect. Okay, let's go and bash the U.S. now, because, like, it seems like everybody's got their hands dirty. Okay, the U.S. unfreezes part of foreign aid for life-saving projects. Now, what happened here was Trump said, we're going to freeze this. That was the issue. The Rubio's State Department then went and put a 90-day freeze on pretty much everything. Well, people still have to pay their bills. So I get it. He was trying to do this to maybe look at how effectively are we spending our money, but that created a lawsuit because, like, people are depending on this. So Secretary of State Rubio made an exception for initiatives providing critical medicine, medical services, food, shelter, and livelihoods. Okay, well, I mean, people have to eat. Like, you can't, like, have your work cut off and still show up. $50 million to buy condoms for Gaza. Okay, so they found some things that maybe weren't, within their view, the best way of spending the money. White House Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt on Tuesday defended President Donald Trump's order to unfreeze federal funding, claiming that $50 million had been earmarked for the distribution of condoms in the besieged Gaza Strip. That's why there was a pause on foreign aid, she says. Here's Trump talking about the same thing.
We identified and stopped $50 million being sent to Gaza to buy condoms for Hamas. 50 million. And you know what's happened to them? They've used them as a method of making bombs. How about that?
Now, I don't know how they're using them to make bombs or whatever, but even if they're just using them the way they're intended, they're looking at that as government waste, and why are we spending on this? Okay, so I see the rationale, But you have some other problems. The courts have stepped in now. Court in the U.S. has stopped Trump's decision to freeze foreign aid. The Trump administration plan has plunged the U.S. government into panic and confusion, setting the stage for a constitutional conflict over control of taxpayer money. It's reported that the district judge's decision was made minutes before the funding restriction was to take effect. And I talked to another YouTuber who you would know, who was telling me that he's talking to NGOs in Ukraine. This isn't Greg Terry, by the way, somebody else who's talking to NGOs in Ukraine who are saying like, hey, like you're stopping us from actually doing what we're supposed to, but we're dependent on the NGO funding for X, Y, or Z. It wasn't affecting military aid to my knowledge, but it would have been affecting other humanitarian efforts. So a federal judge blocks Trump's foreign aid freeze, and there are Ukrainian organizations affected by it, veteran support centers, aid programs suspended, thousands of beneficiaries impacted. And again, it was blocked just at the nick of time, and the block expires on February 3rd, so they can wrap their minds around what's actually happening and then see if they need to go forward or keep the block in place. Now, Michael McFaul, actually, he said something really interesting, and one of my viewers brought this up last week. You guys are freaking smart, and somebody said essentially the same kind of thing. Michael McFaul said this about James Surowiecki, saying the president doesn't get to only spend money on the things that align with his agenda. He's required by the Constitution and by law to spend the money that Congress has appropriated on the things it's appropriated for. So my viewer was saying, well, isn't this de facto a line item veto? Yeah, kind of. I mean, that's essentially how it's being played out. In spirit, it is, even if in practice it wouldn't be a executive veto, but it's still can they really do that? The way that the system's created in the government is the executive branch is supposed to execute the will of the people through the legislative branch as they put that law together. So it's really interesting constitutionally whether Trump can really do this kind of thing. Now, here's a greater concern. In Syria, the United States issued a waiver on January 27th to continue payments for aid and wages for security personnel at Al-Hol camp in northeastern Syria for 2 weeks. Just for 2 weeks. Remember, there's a bunch of like ISIS fighters in prison that we have to maintain those prison, or like the prison guards there, or they get out and ISIS starts again. So you don't want to do that. Okay. So there's bigger issues at play. Okay. Now, Putin does not want peace. Next big story. He wants to win, writes The Economist magazine. The front line is moving in his favor. So why negotiate if you're on the offensive? Timothy Milyanov says, I think this is true, and Trump will have to find a way to squeeze Putin to get peace. And he is thinking about how to squeeze Putin. But Putin, I don't think, is in any mood to actually come to the table. Putin made a number of statements yesterday. Some of them are listed below. But essentially, he said that Ukraine needs to be a participant in the negotiations. Ukraine needs not to be a participant in the negotiations. He said this, Zelensky can participate in the negotiations, but due to his illegitimacy, he cannot sign any documents, saying that he's illegitimate because he hasn't had an election. That's hogwash, nonsense. He can't constitutionally have an election until he's beyond martial law. And then he said Ukraine should have simply withdrawn from the Donetsk and Luhansk regions after February 24th. Then there would have been no war. Well, okay, so that's like saying you shouldn't have been home when I robbed you, or I wouldn't have had to murder you. So that's kind of a non-starter. He said negotiations between Moscow and Kyiv will be illegitimate if conducted now. We should find a way to cancel the previously signed decree, because there's a decree that they can't conduct business with the Putin regime. So, okay. And then Ukraine's sovereignty is almost zero. So this is where Putin is mentally. He's not, he has no intention of coming to the table anytime soon, in my estimation. Now, Girkin, remember Igor Girkin? He's an interesting guy, and he put this on his Telegram channel. I don't know why he's still alive. I mean, given what they do to dissidents, but here's what he had to say. I consider the most important news to be China. Look, we're going to talk about China here. China's readiness to comply with U.S. sanctions against our tanker fleet, blocking 5 tankers with Russian oil in Chinese territorial waters. It has been clear to me for a long time that China is far from supporting Russia in the current special military operation, and at best was ready to benevolently tolerate all the inconveniences associated with it for some time. It has also been clear for a long time that China's patience in connection with the said inconveniences is either running out or has expired completely. The special military operation lasted for almost 3 years, and Russia's victory and the end of the military conflict on terms that suit Moscow is not even on the horizon. Wow. Okay, accordingly, Beijing is demonstrating its irritation and transparently hinting to Moscow that it's time to end on any terms or otherwise. It's not clear to me how to get out of this wonderful situation, having only North Korea as an ally. Well, you have North Korea and Belarus, especially considering that society is not mobilized at all, already very tired of war, and does not feel any enthusiasm for further continuation. Actually, there is a little, and I'll show you what that is in a little bit. However, Moscow is not succeeding in leaving the special military operation on any terms, as they already tried to do in 2022 during the so-called Istanbul agreements. I think I wrote somewhere before that the situation is almost like the joke about the hunter who climbed into a bear's den. Hey, pal, I caught a bear. Then drag him here. I can't. It's holding me. That's kind of where they are. Kyiv will not go for Russian terms, that is, for separating not only Crimea and Donbass from Ukraine, but also Zaporizhia and Kherson, under any circumstances. Well, there's some reality here. While its front is generally strong, it is even doubtful that it will agree to lose Donbass and Crimea. But I can't imagine how, even if Zelensky suddenly agrees to a bargain, it's possible to sell Russians to return the so-called Ukraine of the already constitutionally annexed by the Russian Federation, Kherson and Zaporizhia regions. So, like, even if you said, well, you get Donbass and you get Zaporizhia and Kherson, Ukraine, you get those, and Russia, you keep those, like, Russia's not going for that either. No, of course. And with certain propaganda efforts, the majority, under the slogan, as long as there is no war, will swallow this too. But two problems remain. How will the army react to this? And number two, this is most important, who will guarantee that having occupied the south of the aforementioned regions, the Kyiv partners will not immediately split on these very guarantees? Personally, I believe this is what will happen, as they say everywhere from now on. The most difficult thing for Moscow's terms is ensuring that the population doesn't understand, in the above scenario, that A, we lost the war. He's not only just using the word war, but he's saying that Russia lost the war. And B, the war, although lost, is not over. Not at all. But in all likelihood, this will happen if the people do not radically change their own, I emphasize, attitude toward this very special military operation and the confrontation with NATO, USA, the West in general. He's saying you need to be more confrontational. Wow. Okay, so that's a mouthful there. Now, let's look at this. We're talking about China. OpenAI. So there's this new thing called DeepSeek. It's a Chinese version of ChatGPT, just came out, kind of tubed the markets when it hit. I showed something, Ryan Macbeth talking about it, how they were talking about these transistors that they said that they could do it on these, not transistors, these cards, the chips that could do this without, like, the high power chips. Okay, OpenAI claims to have evidence that Chinese trained their model on American work. So OpenAI did all the work for ChatGPT, and then DeepSeek, the Chinese version, took OpenAI and forced it to teach its model to be smart. Because of this, DeepSeek often calls itself ChatGPT and quotes OpenAI rules. And so what happened was the Chinese just stole it. Essentially stole what the Americans and West largely, but mostly Americans, had done with OpenAI with ChatGPT. Now, there's also this with the Chinese, since we're talking about that. In the last few months, TikTok has started pushing more pro-Russian videos for cold start accounts without any video views. For example, this video has nearly 30 million views. This might suggest that ByteDance is slowly increasing Russian content on the platform. Here, when you want to feel pretty, but you're in Russia and normal people look like models. Okay, so yeah, there's an issue with not just DeepSeek, the AI, but also with ByteDance, who owns TikTok. Okay, let's go on to this. I told you I'd come back to this. In Russia, there is reportedly a growing expectation in the public sentiment that Trump will end the war in Ukraine soon. In combination with large sign-up bonuses to mobilize soldiers, this has reportedly led to queues at military volunteer reception centers in multiple Russian regions. The men who queue to sign up for war now hope to get their money and then return in a month or two safe and sound, since they think it's going to be over really soon, but they want to not miss out on having veteran status and the signing bonus. So if they time it just right, they'll get their training, go there for a very brief time, and then the war will be over. I wouldn't count on it. This is a really risky gamble. Okay. Last couple of things, Darth Putin. Remember a month ago when these guys were ISIS and Russia was saving Syria? Comrade, whoever this is, must be confused. It's not only bad, it's only bad when the U.S. does this. So now the Russians and the Syrians are trying to figure out what's their relationship going to be. It's not going to be what it used to be. Okay, and the last thing, Che Bowles puts this up. China has no chance in tech, and Russia is fighting with shovels. And so he's mocking the West by saying, see, they have DeepSeek and the Russians have Orishnik, but both DeepSeek and Orishnik depend on Western tech. And it's questionable whether the Russians had Orishnik missiles years ago and are just saying that they just have this new advanced stuff. And DeepSeek is looking like it copied Western tech and was claiming that it could do these things that it doesn't look like it can do. But yet he's saying, like, see, Russia and China, they have it going on. I'm not so sure about that. All right, my friends, that's all that I have. I'm sorry that this was kind of a long one, and I'm sorry for the echo as well. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the likes, the shares, and the subscribes, and thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.